Hello, everybody. My name is Sean Trew. I am currently a junior at CSU Stanislaus, and I am studying theater as my major, as you can see by some of these lovely pictures that I have provided. And this is my Society and Sexualities Project video presentation. And I decided to do my project on, you might have guessed it, the institution of theater. There are several reasons why I chose theater as the topic of this project. One of which is that it is a passion of mine, so I really feel very strongly about theater. Um, Another reason is that it is the field that I hope to someday work in, so it's going to pertain to myself moving forward. And I simply just thought it would be interesting to explore sexuality in theater as far as theater history, kind of where it's come from. Um, Mainstream theater, as in what is popular right now on Broadway and where it's at today, and kind of where it's at for me personally within CSU Stanislaus academic theater. And I kind of use those three different mediums as a foundation of this study, and I found several very interesting things in exploring those three different aspects. The first thing I want to discuss is kind of a little history in theater, and there's one particular pioneer of theater that I wanted to talk about because he's such a big influence on theater history around the world, and he is still a big influence on modern day theater today. And that is a fellow by the name of William Shakespeare. Um, a lot of people are familiar with William Shakespeare. Were introduced to him at a very young age because he is a pioneer in literature, and his pieces are considered to be kind of like the foundation of what storytelling is on the stage. And he is considered to be the greatest playwright of all time. And a lot of his works are still influencing modern day theater, and his shows are still being performed to this day. We actually just finished a production of The Two Gentlemen of Verona here at CSU Stanislaus not 2 weeks ago, and that is something that is a part of Shakespeare Under the Stars, which has been going on for about 7 years now. And Shakespeare plays are still being done. They are done year round within the Central Valley, within this nation, and across the world. You can still find Shakespeare being done. And that is a testament to the influence that he has. Now, as far as sexuality goes, there are some very different and fascinating finds in my research, one of which I'm going to go into now. One of the first things that I discovered in researching Shakespeare's works was that he uses sexual desires a lot of the time to drive his stories forward. As you can see by this quote here, Shakespeare's plays are full of sexually arousing incidents. Sexual passion drives the plot of many of them, notably the comedies, early and late, and Romeo and Juliet, Othello, and Antony and Cleopatra. I mean, let's look at Romeo and Juliet, which is arguably one of the most popular Shakespeare plays ever written and ever done. And it's about two young lovers who seemingly fall in love with each other at first sight, and they long for each other. They have a passion for one another. And so much so that they are willing to sacrifice their own lives rather than live without the other. And you can argue that the desire between these two characters is sexual in nature. I mean, the series of events as they meet each other, they decide to have a secret marriage, and then they consummate the marriage, which begs the question of whether or not they just wanted to get to the sex, right? So Shakespeare was using sex as a tool to engage his audiences at a very, very early period of theater. Another thing that I discovered was the amount of heteronormativity in Shakespeare. Now, I talked about Romeo and Juliet. As you can see, I have several other examples here: Othello, Antony and Cleopatra, each of which center around a heterosexual relationship. And majority of Shakespeare's plays actually center around heterosexual relationships, which is very interesting because if Shakespeare is such a huge influence on theater, then in turn, he is a huge influence on the people that go and see theater. Which means if you are an impressionable young person or an impressionable person in general, and you go and see these plays and you see two heterosexual people falling in love with one another, you will start to consider that to be the norm. Not to mention, Shakespeare is in the business of putting butts in the seats. And if he is using heterosexuality as a means to get people to watch his shows, then he is contributing to the belief that heterosexuality is the norm. And he's using that norm to engage the majority of his audiences. Another interesting discovery in my research into Shakespeare was that no women were allowed to actually be on stage during his time, which meant that men had to depict social norms of the opposite sex, which means they had to encompass something that wasn't normal, right? If they were born a man, a heterosexual man, and they were portraying a heterosexual woman on stage with another man, one may argue that is a homosexual act, and they were dressing in drag because they had to dress up as women. So they were kind of the first to experiment with homosexuality and transsexuality in a kind of backwards way, because it was considered normal for men to portray women, but they were still putting on makeup, putting on women's clothes, putting on wigs, and engaging in physical intimacy with other men on stage, which is very fascinating because that's an indicator to me that there is a level of comfortability at this time for men that are performing in theater, which is a direct reflection to my next slide. So after looking at a brief history, particularly with Shakespeare, I'm going to kind of move to the behind the scenes of the theater world and kind of what happens within the small communities of theater, particularly here at CSU Stanislaus, but also across other theater departments and even professional theaters across the nation. And what you kind of tend to find is that it attracts people that don't fit within social norms, and that includes social norms that pertain to sexuality, such as heteronormativity, once again. So those who don't really fall in those categories go to theater for a reason, and the reason is that the environment is that of acceptance and non-judgment, which allows them to be themselves, essentially. And it's so great because what ends up happening is that you get a huge range of diversity just across the board, and not just necessarily to race, but to things like sexual orientation, gender identification, even sexual desires. I mean, these things aren't really judged by other people. They are accepted because that's kind of the mentality that is established within the theater community. And the reason that's established is for several different reasons. But what's so great is that behind the scenes, you really have this freedom to explore yourself sexually and kind of really look at who you are and who you want to be. Continuing with this behind the scenes mentality, the next thing I want to look at is sexuality and acting training. So sexuality is not necessarily the primary focus within acting training, but it is definitely a big part of it. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that. So when you're doing acting training, there's kind of three different aspects that you kind of cover. The first one is you're building trust on and off stage, which is a huge thing because trust is established so that people can feel more comfortable expressing themselves and being vulnerable. And ultimately, the hope is that you'll be able to transfer that on stage. There's certain exercises that are used, such as one particular exercise is, expressing kind of a deep, dark secret about yourself. It doesn't have to be dark, but it has to be something that you don't commonly share with other people. And then other people share their secrets with you. And what this kind of does is it puts you all in an even playing field and it builds trust. But a lot of the times, these secrets have to do with sexuality, like gender identification or sexual orientation. A lot of people expressing that they had difficulty with being homosexual or identifying themselves as one gender when they were told they're another, and things like that come up very commonly within these exercises. Another thing is the exploration of self, and that's kind of broken up into three different parts: who you think you are, who others think you are, and who you want to be. Now, what this does is, once again, it creates this mentality of trust, and it creates a environment to be free to explore yourself, which means in turn that you feel free to have an exploration of your own sexuality, which can include things like sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexual desires. And the hope is that if you're going to be portraying a character on stage that doesn't really fit into your sexual orientation or your gender identity, well, then you'll be able to kind of pull from somebody else's experience and project that onto the stage when you go out to perform. But once again, you're creating this environment to explore yourself, and not only yourself, but your sexual identity, which is an amazing, amazing thing. So now that I've shown you a little bit about the workings behind the scenes, I kind of wanted to focus on what's happening on the stage. And I kind of looked at two different venues. I looked at Broadway, which I kind of just focused on the more popular shows that are happening right now, which are Hamilton, Wicked, The Book of Mormon, The Lion King. And then I looked at CSU Stanislaus and the plays that they did this year, which are The Fantastics, Vinegar Tom, Constellations, and The Two Gentlemen of Verona. What I kind of found about these different plays is that, once again, you're seeing a lot of heteronormativity within each of them. I mean, each of these plays deal with heterosexual relationships in one shape or form. Although there are some variants here, the Book of Mormon kind of goes in homosexuality, but it is a farce, so it kind of makes fun of the fact that one of the characters can't really come to terms with his own sexual orientation. Vinegar Tom actually explores a lot of sexual desire, particularly from women during the 18th century when the witch hunts were happening, and kind of what they had to deal with when they kind of deviated from what was considered to be the norm at the time. So if you were promiscuous, you kind of got persecuted. Even if a rumor started that you were sleeping with somebody else, you were in trouble. And even one of the characters actually is attracted, she is a female attracted to other females, and she kind of pays a very heavy price in a very gruesome way in that show. But once again, the primary focus is heterosexual relationships, which is kind of contrasting this, diversity that we find behind the stage. And then when we get on stage, you're just seeing heterosexuality as a primary sexual orientation. So, in conclusion, I have gone over some of the brief history of theater, specifically as it pertains to William Shakespeare's influences on theater and how he used sexual desires to drive his plots forward, as well as heteronormativity as a way to engage his audiences. I also kind of discussed how he indirectly influenced homosexuality and transsexuality by having men dress up as women and portray female characters in his shows. I kind of discussed with you the behind the scenes environment where there is an atmosphere of trust that is created for people to explore their identity, as well as their sexual identity as it pertains to sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual desires. And then I kind of discussed with you the plays that are being presented on stage as far as mainstream theater goes, which is Broadway, and immediate theater, which is CSU Stanislaus for a lot of us, and how they are also promoting heteronormativity. Not to say that there are not shows that cover other aspects of sexuality, because there are shows, there just are not popular shows that have done this. And what we're seeing is a lot of heteronormativity within these plays, which begs the question of the social construction of heterosexuality within theater. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed this video and this presentation.